This episode is brought to you by Shopify. Forget the frustration of picking commerce platforms when you switch your business to Shopify, the global commerce platform that supercharges your selling wherever you sell. With Shopify, you'll harness the same intuitive features, trusted apps, and powerful analytics used by the world's leading brands. Sign up today for your $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/tech, all lowercase. That's shopify.com/tech.
Going to Saudi Arabia, Mr. President? Are you going to Saudi Arabia?
Elon Musk has said that he has a super bad feeling about the U.S. economy. He's laying off 10%. What do you say to Elon Musk about his feeling about the economy? Jamie Dimon has said similar things.
Well, let me tell you, while Elon Musk is talking about that, Ford is increasing their investment overwhelmingly. I think Ford is increasing the investment in building new electric vehicles, 6,000 new employees, union employees, I might add, in the Midwest. The former Chrysler Corporation, Stellantis, they are also making similar investments in electric vehicles. Intel is adding 20,000 new jobs for making computer chips. Lots of luck in this trip to the moon.
Broadcasting from the Big Peach of Atlanta, Georgia. A show unfiltered, unscripted, raw. The Patriot Angle Podcast.
Alrighty, guys, welcome to tonight's show. Welcome. This is the Patriot Angle Podcast, Unfiltered, with Michael Gardner. Today, guys, we have a special guest joining us all the way from the country of Japan. On the show today is Ken, a former cop, soldier, and lifelong martial artist. Also, he is now a political economist, if I can't pronounce that word today. How you doing, Ken?
I am very well. Pleased to join you. Thanks for having me.
It's an honor to have you joining us all the way from Japan. You want to tell us a little story, how you got to Japan?
Sure. It started probably when I was a young man, well, even an adolescent, 10 or 11 years old, got very interested in the ninja boom when Stephen K. Hayes started publishing his books, and the program Shogun, that miniseries, was on TV. I watched that, really got fascinated. Lots of movies and things along those lines, messing around with my brother, practicing martial arts in the backyard. And I wound up joining the military and seeing the world a little bit, got into law enforcement when I was 24, started training in Aikido primarily, and it's been with me ever since. And I was also part-time with the military and started angling my career away from the combat arms, got into political military affairs, traveled the world, Africa, Europe, wound up in Japan finally, and then I retired here, and I love it. So that's how that's really the short course in how I wound up in Japan. I was able to get the military to pay for my move, and then just decided to stick around because I do indeed love it here.
Yeah. That's an interesting story. And, you're pretty much, it's the next day for you. It's Saturday morning there. And I'm told you live in Tokyo, correct?
Yes.
Tokyo. Right. So it's, what is it, about like 8 o'clock in the morning there?
It's 9:05. Yeah.
9:05 on a Saturday morning, folks. He's literally joining us from around the world, so to speak.
It's the future.
Pretty much, right? We haven't even seen Saturday yet. It's still 8 o'clock p.m. Eastern here on the East Coast of United States, here in Atlanta, Georgia. So that's pretty pretty fascinating. I haven't had anybody on the show literally joining the show, into the future, the next day, so to speak. So that's good stuff. Good stuff. And by the way, Ken, thank you for your service, by the way.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And really, it's not so much about me. I came back with all my fingers and toes, thank goodness. But I've had some friends that did not make it back at all, and other people that came back completely maimed and permanently scarred and disfigured. So since
Yeah.
it was Memorial Day just recently. And it's a bit of an emotional roller coaster every year, because
And I'm sure you hold that day very, very close to your heart, Memorial Day, as other service members do.
yeah, especially getting to see things from the ugly side, the political side, and the band of brothers and the valiant warriors that went forward and did what their country asked them to do. And when you start to look at it from a larger perspective, you see the geopolitical machinations taking place. That's when my blood starts to really boil.
Right. And, you mentioned a really good topic, which I've discussed on this show many times, the geopolitical angle of it, the agenda. What do you see going on right now, especially in the United States? I don't know if you get the same amount of media coverage there in Japan like we do here in the States. Do you see it, a little bit different now that you're out of the service compared to what's being shown now?
Well, I mean, I was very patriotic and was eager to join the military the day after I turned 17. So I was all in. And during the first Gulf War, 1991, I was chomping at the bit to get in there. And then when 9/11 happened, again, I was one of the first ones to volunteer to go over. And it took a little bit longer than I had anticipated. But I wound up doing 3 tours over there in Iraq and Afghanistan. And, I was all up in it. I wanted to be there. And then I started to see, well, things aren't really working as well as was promised. And, the systems and processes of the military bureaucracies were very bogged down and were very retarding to the war efforts. And I just said, something's not right. So one day while we were out on patrol, and I was working 6 days on, 1 day off, and doing route clearance patrol because I was an explosive ordnance disposal technician, bomb squad kind of guy. And flaming tanker had been hit by a roadside bomb that we were supposed to be protecting. It didn't happen on my watch, but this tanker was 7,000 liters of gasoline that the war effort was running up from Kuwait along this main supply route, Tampa. And it got hit by a roadside bomb, and it was burning just out of this small hole in the side of the tanker itself. So they didn't want to put it out because there's 7,000 liters of gasoline in there. So they just let it burn, and it burned for 5 days straight. So every day for the 6 days of my work week, I drove past it, watched it burn on the way down and then on the way back. And at the same time, if you'll recall, around 2007, the price of a barrel of oil shot up to $140. So wow. I'm thinking, here we are, this 7-vehicle convoy. We're burning all this fuel to keep the supply routes open. And this vehicle gets burned from a roadside bomb and the price of oil. There's got to be a connection there. There's got to be a connection with all the fuel that we're burning doing these patrols, with all the fuel that they're sending up from Kuwait to supply the war effort, and then the fuel that's getting destroyed in the attacks, and then the price of oil on the world stage. So that's what really drew me out of my little localized, let me at them kind of scrappy-do mentality, and to start thinking about, okay, there's a connection here. What are those connections? And that's what led me to study economics. And eventually you start to realize there's a heck of a lot more going on in the world, and it is really driven by economics. So when you look at geopolitics, it's all about economics. It's all about control of resources. And I really, really want the Patriot community to really start looking at economics and studying the principles there. And then the real world starts to open up to you.
Ken, I agree with you on that. I think, we've seen a huge political shift in the last possibly 10 or maybe 15 years now, with all these different types of presidential administrations coming in. Now we have Biden in control, and previous to that was Trump and then Obama. There's such a huge difference between these 3 presidential administrations. Of course, and it goes all the way back to Bush even, and a lot of this, some people like to blame it on Bush, but I look at as, they're all the same pretty much, Ken. A politician is a politician. You know, they can promise so many different things, you know, for us Americans, and then, of course, the world too as well. But when it comes down to it, they don't. A lot of them, they don't deliver. You know what I mean? They don't deliver the results, and we've seen that firsthand. And our country is still the greatest country in the face of, you know, on the world, right? I mean, so many different types of opportunities to be to fulfill here in the States. But, you know, we're seeing this, you know, especially the military. You know, we've had a depleted military under Obama. Trump rebuilt it. And it seems like we're going back to the old Obama days under this administration. You know, do you care to, you know, comment on that? Or
Absolutely, because there's a continuity when you look at the foreign policy. It really hasn't changed all that much post 9/11. All the presidents thereafter, all the administrations seem to carry on the same basic contours of foreign policy. You know, even Obama came in and said that he was going to change the standing of the United States in the world, but he actually opened up new fronts in the war of terror. He continued on with all the same. He didn't end anything. He didn't close Guantanamo. He didn't do really much of anything that was very different from his predecessor. And for all of the great rhetoric that Trump came in with, not much changed in terms of what was going on internationally. He said things about ending NATO, but he kept it going. He decided to send a big bill to the Japanese for the U.S.-Japan alliance, said they weren't paying their fair share, and that never got paid. So what we're seeing is great continuity, and I'm going to give you my formula up front. It starts with two basic postulates. One comes from Sun Tzu, The Art of War, and that is all war is based on deception. All war, not just some, but all war. And then the second one comes from von Clausewitz, the great Prussian theorist and strategist, and he wrote a book on war, and he said that war is just politics by other means. So if you take those two postulates together, all war is based on deception and war is politics by other means, you get to understand that war and politics are functional equivalents on the same spectrum, along a line of spectrum.
Right.
And
a lot of that.
Yeah,
I'm sorry. A lot of that. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
You can conclude then that all politics is based on deception. And that's another message that I would really like your audience to understand, is that when you look at politics, know that you're looking at war, and war is always based on deception. What is the objective of war? It's to force people to the will of the victor. And what does that mean? Force people to the will. It always comes down to resources, and it's the control of resources that matter. That's what I want people to take away from my experience.
Right. Right. A lot of that also piggybacks off of the old 1984 novel of George Orwell, which he had actually put in his book. So what you had just mentioned, kind of like I said, piggybacks off that book a lot. You know, what George Orwell seen in 1984 up to the coming events that we're experiencing now in a modern world, right? We're seeing it happen pretty much every single day. We're seeing deception. We're seeing division. We're seeing chaos. We're seeing rhetoric. We're seeing all of it, Ken. And, you know, to end all that, I believe, you know, we have to become more united. I know that sounds crazy in a lot of people's mindsets, but to become united in this world, that's when you truly end all of it. But, you know, I mean, we have to come to reality. I don't think that will ever happen, you know, in our lifetime.
Always bear in mind that the political caste have a design to keep people distracted and keep them confused. And also, this is a big one, keep them in fear. Because when people are afraid, they will then look to those public officers, those government actors, those international organizations to restore order in some way. And of course, those people have an incentive. All people respond to incentives. That's one of the principles of economics. Those people in power that are going to shape that new order are going to create it in a way that benefits them at everyone else's expense because they want the control of resources, and not the least of which is human resources. So when you talk about unity, that's absolutely true. But unity doesn't mean uniformity. So therefore, people need to recognize that the way to liberty, the way to restore what made America great, is not by everybody doing the same thing, but by making things as local as possible. Politics needs to stay local. And so avoiding all of these internationalist, globalist designs and the inroads that they're making through Agenda 2030 and environmental policy and all those things are all part of the Great Deception, and the Great Deception is designed to gain control of those resources. The solution is to keep things local. So local self-governance was the objective of the revolution and the Constitution.
And, ladies and gentlemen, I mean, what you're hearing on the show today is definitely not only a former cop and a soldier to his label, but a true advocate to the service of liberty, which you, my friend, sir, you pretty much deserve that title. You do have a service to liberty, as what you're saying here on the show fits those words very, very accurately. Now, you use the actors, right? The government actors, and I like that term. I've never heard that term before, so it's a little new to me, but I like it. And we're seeing that right now under this administration, which, a lot of people will kind of chuckle probably after they hear me say this on the show. I see a lot of political cartoons, so to speak, coming out of this administration, especially the Biden administration. And the reason why I say that is it's a little different from the last three administrations with Trump, Obama, and Bush. We're seeing a lot of flip-flops scenarios under Biden. I'm not sure if you're following what I'm saying, but you could see what he says, and then he flip-flops back to what he originally said probably 20 or 30 years ago when he first got into politics. Are you seeing that under Biden, or are you just seeing something entirely different?
Absolutely. I mean, you look at his stance on gay marriage, you look at his stance on certain criminal activities, and you know that he is not a principled individual.
Well, he's a puppet. I mean, we see that. Yeah.
Absolutely. And what we are seeing, it kind of goes back to that movie, The Matrix, where whenever you see a deja vu scenario or you see the cat was shimmering, I think it was in the first Matrix.
Yeah.
It's glitches in the Matrix, this facade, this deception that they're putting forward to present to the people has massive holes in it. And when you see those flip-flops, you recognize that this deception operation is faulty, that they don't have all their bases covered. And I want to go back to that idea of government actors, calling them government actors rather than the government. Remember what the Constitution says, and I want people to really get this and wake up to the idea that we, the people, are the government.
Right.
Not though, and so people talk about the Second Amendment. Oh, you're going to fight the government with your AR-15. No, I'm going to restore the government with my AR-15 because we, the people, are the government, not the politicians and the bureaucrats and the cronies.
Well, here's the thing, Ken. Here's the thing, Ken. Like you mentioned, the original formula, the original agenda for the Constitution, right? The Bill of Rights, what our four founding fathers had set down in place. Now, folks, these were four men that literally signed their death warrants. They knew what they were getting into. They knew that this was going to be bloodshed upon bloodshed so many years ago when they signed this great document, the greatest document that was ever signed for the United States was the Constitutional Bill of Rights. Okay. When they signed this, Ken, they knew that they were facing extreme threats upon their lives, but they knew, Ken, this was the ultimate sacrifice that they had to do in order to store laws in this country. And, fast forward, what is almost now 200 some odd years, that document is still in place. But you know what's really sad, Ken, is, you have a new type of society that doesn't honor the same principles that America once stood for. And I think a lot of it has to do with media, manipulating this generation. Because when you don't know your history, it's very easily to manipulate a society that doesn't know that doesn't know it accurately. You know what I mean?
I do. And we have to go back to those founding principles. We remember that the Declaration of Independence was signed by people who pledged their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor. And I think that resonates well with somebody who studies samurai-related martial arts, or any martial arts for that matter. I think that the American character originally had a sense of honor as well, and that is slowly eroding. If there's anything left of it, I haven't been to the United States in quite a while, so I don't know.
There's a lot of toxins in this country. I can tell you, you're not missing much.
No, and I'm fortunate that I get to curate the news that I watch or absorb and digest. So I get to see it, and I look at everything through the lens of political economy now. So I look at it as a scientist rather than just a consumer. And I'd really like people to start to wake up to that idea as well, is that you really need to stand guard at the doorway of your mind and be a Zen warrior who is filtering everything through that lens of principle. And to go back to that Constitution, remember, it was designed to secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity. So we, as inheritors of that great legacy, need to also preserve the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity. And that is the great challenge of our lives. You brought up something about people that are disillusioned and don't see a lot of hope. And again, this is the challenge that we in this generation need to rise up to, so that they have a legacy to pass on.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. There's another topic here I wanted to get into with you, which I feel deserves a base here, a platform on the show. But Ken, keep that thought in mind. I got to get a quick break in, but we're going to be right back. I want to get into the whole story, kind of getting off a little bit of topic here, but I want to get into another topic because this topic here, Ken, has a lot to do with what we're talking about. Guys, don't touch the dial. We'll be right back after these short words.
Look around. The world is changing fast. And while some people hang on to the way things have always been, others are showing us the way they could be. There's a growing movement comprised of those who won't compromise, those with the desire to push things forward coded right into their DNA. They are the creators. They unleash their ideas on die-hard believers as well as the unconvinced. They make something new where there was nothing before, shining a light to reveal what others can't see. So we say to all creators, your time is now to champion fresh ideas, build new movements, and earn what you deserve. From here on out, you define creativity, community, and commerce. We're just here to provide everything you need to make all that you imagine and share it with the world at the speed of culture. This is Spring for Creators.
Have you heard of Rumble.com? It's like YouTube, but without big tech censorship. I'm over there at Rumble.com now, and you should be too.
All right, guys, back to the show here. Joining us today is Ken. He's a former cop and a former soldier, and he also has a desire, passion for the service of liberty. Welcome back to the show, Ken. Ken, we're talking about a lot of good stuff here on the show. We're talking about deception. We're talking about the true purpose of liberty here on the show, and what it means to people. I want to get into another topic with you because I have a huge passion, not only for politics, but I have a huge opinion on what's going on with social media. I kind of basically got into a little bit of you before the show started, with social media and censorship and the attack on free speech. We're seeing it very heavily being played out here in the United States. I'm not sure if it is being played out heavily there in the country of Japan, but I could tell you right now, Ken, free speech is pretty much under attack here in the United States. Are you seeing that in Japan, or is it seems to be just an issue here in the United States?
I think the United States enjoys a certain privilege that is not available anywhere else in the world, which makes it so precious. And anywhere else in the world is already captured. Most of the media in other countries is tax funded,
right,
and regulated, just like the BBC. People have to pay a tax. Here in Japan, NHK is also paid for directly through taxation. Whereas in the United States, the public broadcasting system, yes, it's tax subsidized, and so it's basically a propaganda outlet, no different than the Pravda of the Soviet Union. I mean, it's more blatant. And
right.
The United States is unique in that sense. In Germany, there are certain people that can go to jail for the things that they say.
Oh, sure.
So free speech is not enshrined in any governmental contract anywhere else in the world.
Well,
And
you mentioned
we're starting to
Germany.
see
I
it
mean,
slip
their
away in the
political
United States. That's dangerous.
Right. I mean, you mentioned Germany. I mean, their political backyard has been the same, since the early 1900s and even before then.
That's right. They're still living in Bismarck's Germany. It's no different
Yeah.
from 1872.
Yeah, I mean, this goes even further back before the Hitler era. I mean, this is. I mean, they've been pretty much practicing that same political specter, so to speak, for the last 200 years, if that, maybe more.
Well, I would, again, as I said, it's 1872 in Germany. It's still Bismarck's Germany. And what did Bismarck do? He said that he wanted to defeat the communist wave by adopting socialist policies. So, it was all about concentrating power. And he said that he was going to prevent the rise of communism by adopting socialist policies. Well, what does that sound like? It's exactly like FDR. It's the same thing with the Cold War. We wanted to defeat the Soviet Union. Therefore, we needed to create this massive military industrial complex and control industry so that we can have this Cold War. And
oh, sure.
This is what I mean by you see a continuity in policies that has been taking place all over the world, a little bit slower, but still has the same basic contours in the United States. So what we're seeing is creeping socialism infecting the United States as well. And of course, in order to enact socialist policies, you need to have a massive, massive propaganda campaign to get the people to accept it. So you have to have both the carrot and stick. And that's exactly what is being witnessed in the United States. You're suppressing dissident voices, whether it be through social media, whether it be through cutting them off from the banking system, Operation Choke Point, an Obama era legacy, but we're seeing it today. And you saw that with the Canadian truckers, where people that wanted to support that protest movement saw their funds seized. So control of the resources. Always think about this is what the real war is about: control of resources.
Oh, yeah.
And controlling the means. It always comes down to private property, because the freedom of speech is meaningless if you don't have an outlet like what we're on right now. And that's why the freedom of the press was enshrined in the Bill of Rights. It's so important to be able to speak, but you also need the means, the physical means of getting your word out. So if it's a printing press, if it's a website, if it's a podcast, if it's YouTube or what have you, whatever those outlets are, those need to be held in private hands and kept free from political interference. That's the only way out of this creeping socialism problem.
I think that was the problem there when social media first took its platform, right, in the early 2000s. I was basically in college then. And I remember when social media first got its first launch, of course, before Facebook and Twitter and Instagram ever came into existence, we had the original formula of it through a platform which I don't even think exists anymore. It was called MySpace. I always looked as MySpace as the original Facebook, right? And I can remember this, Ken, as it was yesterday. We never had a problem with the original social media platform. There was no censorship. There was no fact checking. There was none of that garbage that you see today. I think the problem that you mentioned, and you brought up a good point, when social media introduced its way to politics, that's when it became a problem. When government had put its hands on it, its footprint, right? That's when it became a problem. And now it's looked as a subsidy of, and this is my opinion now, guys, and you can agree with me or not, but I look at social media as now a subsidy of a government agency. You know what I mean? I mean, you see it through we just were told, the person or the people that had a huge influence on fact checking with this whole Ministry of Truth, which we seen a little glimpse of it, in the 80s and everything before social media and the internet ever came into existence. Do you see some type of government, agency under social media, or do you think it's an entirely different entity?
See, this is where I'm going to put my criminal investigator hat back on and tell people to follow the money. If you actually trace the funding for where Facebook and a lot of other Silicon Valley enterprises comes from, you can trace that back to government funding and the Stanford Research Laboratory, as well as In-Q-Tel, which is the CIA's venture capital firm that spreads money around these different budding industries and technologies to get a result. And Facebook derives a lot of their funding and maybe even some technological support through those types of outlets. So you're seeing that there was a government hand from inception in a lot of these social media giants. What happens is they keep it free. They allow people to think that they're getting a platform, and that attracts them to bootstrap the platform and get people interested in it. And then they start to slowly restrict access and to shape the message and to change the algorithms to support the policy that they want to institute.
Right.
So it's a little bit insidious from its inception. And again, I tell everybody to follow the money, do your own research. And you brought up these so-called fact checkers. If you actually look at the money behind those organizations, you'll see that they are nothing but front groups for the same people that are trying to shape the policy. So a lot of, and there's a famous one, the Pointer organization, the Pointer Group or Pointer Institute, supposed to be all about good journalism. And they're one of the big proponents of this fact check movement. Well, that's just AstroTurf for the political elite. You'll see that they get money from the Gates Foundation and basically
it's all funded through Gates and Soros and everything else. Yeah, which they have a huge influence over. But we're on this social media topic here. Just recently, which you're pretty much well aware of, Elon Musk just bought Twitter. We heard that for months upon months prior to his purchase, that he had a high interest in purchasing Twitter. Now, when he's shown that interest of purchasing Twitter, a lot of liberals here in the United States were in fear of him doing this. Well, why were they in fear? Well, he can loosen up the restrictions, meaning fact checking and censorship and shadow banning and all these type of big tech terminologies, right? Now, he could still do that. We haven't seen it done yet, or we've seen a little bit of the restrictions come off with Twitter, a little bit. But do you think he's going to go to that avenue? And if he does go that avenue, Ken, do you think this is going to be a big step for social media? Because I don't know if you're on True Social, Donald Trump's platform. That's what I'm told is doing phenomenal, not only here in the United States, but now across the world. It's becoming available in other countries. Do you think that Elon Musk's Twitter will join the same avenue and the same roots as True Social and now Rumble?
I think it's way too early to tell. Just like the deal itself, I understand that the deal hasn't gone through and there's a couple of hiccups as far as what's going on with the due diligence that precedes the actual sale. The fact that he made an offer and the board accepted it, well, now they need to actually open up the books. And that even is enough to trigger the left. And again, that goes back to what we talked about earlier. They need to control the narrative because massive propaganda is a prerequisite to instituting these socialist policies. And you made mention of the book 1984, which is great. I think there's a scene in there where he has to be convinced, or he has to admit that 2 and 2 does not equal 4. It equals 5 or some other number. And the same thing is going on right now, where the left wants to convince people that there are not 2 genders. And in order to do that, there needs to be a massive campaign. It uses both a carrot and a stick. They sanction people and they just suppress any dissident voices that do not support this leftist propaganda. So it is yet to be seen whether or not Twitter actually changes things materially. We've seen some minor changes, but that might be just like what a boa constrictor does, right? It allows you to take a breath, and then every time you exhale, it tightens. So I don't know. But it's the rhetoric was sufficient to scare the left, just like Donald Trump. He really didn't do much materially, but his rhetoric was enough to trigger the left into a frenzy, and that's what we're seeing right now.
Yeah, he didn't do much. I agree with that. You know, he didn't do much, but I mean, yes, he was only a one-term president, and you know, God willing, if he does run in 2024, which I don't know if he is or not, but you know, he only had 4 years. I think, you know, to be honest with you, he did a lot in 4 years. The only suit that I think he did best was his foreign policy. He had a very, very strong foreign policy. A lot of world leaders got along with Trump. I mean, Christ, we've seen the dictator of North Korea, I mean, literally walking side by side. I mean, you don't see that with many leaders here in the United States, even senators and congressmen and women. I mean, you know,
and leadership matters. Definitely. It sets the tone.
I mean, he even had respect from President Xi of China. I mean, you know, that says a lot, you know, for a businessman turned politician. And, you know, I think, you know, we talk about Donald Trump as we close it out here and then Elon Musk. I mean, maybe that's what we need for this country, Ken, is a businessman that knows what's best for America and not a politician that's just going to, you know, say the same broken promises that they've been saying for the last 20, 40 years.
Yeah, I agree that there needs to be a change in leadership because, as I said earlier, leadership does matter. It sets the tone. The unfortunate thing about all of that is the bureaucracy is overwhelming. You look what happened with Ukraine when Trump even hinted at not giving Ukraine weaponry. Somebody within the Pentagon, this Vinkman, lieutenant colonel type, decided that he was going to carry on with the program exactly how he had envisioned it, regardless of what the president's orders were. Yeah. And that's just a metaphor of what the bureaucracy did. They call it the deep state, and people want to debate the fact of whether or not it exists. I think it's
very much alive.
Undeniable that
it's very much alive. Yes.
The more bureaucracy that exists is the deeper the state becomes. There's no denying it. And I was part of it for a long time. So
yeah, I think we're living under a shadow government right now, especially with this administration. A lot of people think that you know, Big Brother. You know, a lot of people like to look at it as Big Brother as Joe Biden, but I really think that Big Brother is not Joe Biden. I think Joe Biden is basically the puppet, and the person that's pulling the strings is somebody else. Because, you know, if you did pay attention earlier in this podcast episode, folks, I plugged in a video with reporters questioning Joe Biden about a statement. And he's totally flip-flopping the entire statement. Like Joe is, you know, he's not there. I mean, I've said it many times on the show. The elevator doesn't go to the top floor with this president. They're talking about something else, and then he's going into like, good luck with Elon Musk if he lands on the moon. Like, Joe, we're talking about something else. So I think you talk about the deep state, which I think is very much alive here in this country. There is a shadow government. I don't think Joe is running the show there at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. A lot of people are either thinking it is either Obama, maybe possibly having a third term under a disguise of some type of old constitutional amendment that may have never been passed, or it has been passed and we just don't know about it, or possibly Nancy Pelosi. There's been a lot of rumors of that. So I don't know.
I think all those people are simply figureheads, and that the real policies are set in rooms far different from the places where they stand. And that's why we see, again, looking at foreign policy, there was continuity of policy from 9/11 till today, and no president really did much to change it materially.
No.
And I think that this Biden administration, like you said, is certainly not running the show. It's certainly not Joe Biden himself. He can't think.
No.
He's just carrying on talking points. But that's how all government offices work. I mean,
sure.
When I was in combatant commands, you have 4-star generals that get hit with some news thing, and he turns to his staff and says, "What are we doing about this?" And then the low-level staffers write the talking points, and the high-level staffers come up with the policy positions, and the generals are just figureheads. And that's within the military, let alone the entire United States federal system.
Well, we see Trump just comment just recently, with 4-star generals, that with the whole Afghanistan pullout just recently last year. I mean, he said you have 4-star generals now that are more like wusses. I mean, you have these generals that don't even know what the hell they're doing, like advisors under Biden. Like, who the hell pulls out their military command units first, but leaves all the weapons last? I mean,
that's 100% right. I used to work with an old grizzly cop who was a Korean War veteran, and he said that he went over there as a Marine and said, "This is no way to win a war," and wound up leaving the Marines after his tour. And then he wound up becoming a cop, etc. I said the same thing to myself in Iraq, and then even more so in Afghanistan. I was like, there's no way that winning this war can be the focus or the objective of the policies that we're seeing play out, because it's just absurd. And the bureaucracy is just incompetent. And it doesn't matter. You want to love the country. That doesn't mean you need to love the incompetent bureaucracies. The same army that killed Pat Tillman is the one that you're waving your flag for. It's not the army that is the backbone of the United States. It's the liberty of the American people. And that's what needs to come to the fore.
I mean, what he did, Ken, was like, you even had far leftists of this country scratching their heads like, come on, Joe. Like, do you realize what the hell you just did? You just literally built an army of modern weaponry for the Taliban. Literally. And then now you have literally terrorist units running that country. I never thought in my wildest dreams I would see that. It's not a dream. Actually, it's a nightmare to have a terrorist group run a country like that and then gift it. We literally gave him a Christmas gift of weapons and modern military equipment that was purchased through when President Donald Trump was in office. I mean, equipment that, now the enemy knows everything about.
Well, take it another step further. During the Obama administration, that dust up in Syria was at its height. And there was a time when the Department of Defense and the U.S. military was funding one group of rebels, and the CIA was funding and arming a competing faction. And that was more aligned with Al-Qaeda and the Islamic State. So again, this is the message that I want everyone to take away, is that when you say, quote unquote, the U.S. government, you're not talking about one thing. You're talking about factions. You're talking about competing bureaucracies. You're talking about parochialism, and everybody wants their share of the pie. So don't give them the credit of calling them the government. Call it the Army. Call it
Ken,
the Department of Defense.
This is not the same government that when it was first started out. I mean, we aren't. This isn't a government. Well, it is a government, but it acts as more of a corporation. You know, when they say the United States is a country, it acts more of like a corporation than anything. You know, because if you look at it like that, it's true. You know, the government is funded by the people. If the people don't work, they don't get funded. That's a corporation, you know?
And that's a good way to look at it. But it's a better way to just call it a mafia.
Well,
and
that
when
too.
you say a mafia, you're talking about not just one family. You're talking about competing families. They might all be extortionists and racketeers, and that's the same for the political caste as well. I'm talking about the politicians, the bureaucrats, and the cronies. Anybody who derives their living through taxation is part of this machine. It's a looting machine. It's best to call it a kleptocracy. And you can love your country and recognize also that there is always a criminal element. And so there needs to be new safeguards for our liberty. And fortunately, they are already written into the Constitution. The only problem is there's a massive, massive waking up that needs to happen because the propaganda is thick. And again, all war is based on deception.
Well, Ken, as I close it out, we need to wake up. You know, we don't need to be woke, because that's what's going on in the country right now. Everything is woke, which I hate that word, woke. It's like, what? No.
Yeah, and you got the generals in the military that are more focused on advancing all these woke agenda items, LGBTQ issues and women, peace, and security. All of that has nothing to do with
I just labeled this on my show last
States.
night. I did a piece on how the Marine Corps now is honoring the Pride Month here in America, which I call the Alphabet Month, right? Because it's the LGBTQ plus, right? Sorry if I'm offending anybody. Well, actually, I'm not. If you're offended, oh well. I don't live by the new principles, Ken. I'm old school. I mean, my grandparents, if they were still alive, they would be ashamed of what's going on today.
I'm kind of laughing because the B in that LGBTQ plus formula, the B means binary, right? Bisexual. So that kind of admits that there's only two genders.
Yeah.
So that you see the incoherence that they're okay to sit in when they advance these ideas.
Yeah,
that's what the generals care about more of.
Yeah, I just got yelled at the other day by a transgender person the other day saying, you need to accept me. And I looked at them and I said, you want me to accept you, but you can't even accept yourself for what you really are. Oh, okay. Good luck with that.
Yeah, and when I was a cop, I dealt with a number of those people. And again, I accept them. That doesn't mean I have to countenance bad behavior. That doesn't mean I need to accept you in my restaurant or my facility. You know, that's what private property means, the right to include or exclude. So I accept you, but that doesn't mean you have the right to access my things, my property, my spaces.
I tell you, you know, Lady Liberty right now is in tears, you know, over there at the Hudson River there in New York and New Jersey. She's in tears right now because I'm sure she sees what's going on in this country. Ken, we have a broken society as well as a broken nation, and it's going to take a lot to fix this country, a lot.
Yeah, and again, you need to build the mental, spiritual, emotional fortitude, and then I suggest you do that by way of training in a martial art, because it is everyone's duty, every able-bodied citizen's duty to be organized, armed, and disciplined to execute the laws, repel invasions, and suppress insurrections without reliance upon the political caste. That's the only way to take back this country. Personal fortitude, and then contribute it to the maintenance of a free society.
Yeah, absolutely. But sadly, we may not see that in our lifetimes. It's going to happen, but like I said, sadly, I don't think it's going to happen in our lifetimes.
It's going to take a lot more suffering, unfortunately, to wake people up. But
unfortunately,
you can see that, Ken, in your own life as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Ken, I want to thank you for coming on the show. I want to thank you for giving your insights, your story. I also want to thank you again for the service of your service and your sacrifice to this great country. We are still a great country, but we are somewhat of a we need to go into a healing process. But I want to thank you for coming on this show. I want to thank you for taking your time out of your busy day, and please always continue the great fight, sir.
Thank you, and you too. I appreciate your efforts with this podcast and helping to wake people up.
Thank you very much, sir.
Patriot Unfiltered. You just heard an episode of the Patriot Angle Podcast, an unfiltered Patriot Productions. Please follow us on Facebook at the Patriot Angle Podcast and Instagram at Patriot_Angle_Unfiltered. Also, you can hear every episode on Amazon Music, Audible, Spotify, Google, and Apple Podcasts. You can also check out our website, PatriotAnglePodcast.com, and also our unfiltered merchandise, PatriotUnfiltered.com. Thanks for tuning in, and we will see you on the next one.